Have you ever wondered why some people can walk into a room without saying a word, and yet everyone notices them? It's not because they're the loudest. It's not because they're the smartest. And it's certainly not because they're chasing attention. The people we remember, the people we trust, the people we choose to follow, they earn something far more powerful than visibility. They earn significance. We've been taught that success comes from being seen, from building a bigger audience, a stronger personal brand, or a louder voice. But human beings have never been wired to follow noise. We are wired to follow purpose. We don't ignore people because they're untalented. We ignore them because they fail to make us feel something meaningful. The truth is, becoming impossible to ignore has very little to do with standing out, and everything to do with standing for something. When your actions consistently reflect your values, when your words match your behavior, and when your purpose becomes bigger than your ego, people don't just notice you, they remember you. They trust you. They want to be part of what you're building. In a world where millions compete for attention every second, attention has become cheap. Authenticity has become rare. And rare things always carry value. So today isn't about learning how to impress people. It's about discovering how to become the kind of person whose presence creates confidence, whose leadership inspires action, and whose purpose leaves a lasting impact long after the conversation ends. Because the people who change the world aren't the ones demanding to be seen. They're the ones who become too valuable to overlook. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that if they can just get more attention, everything else will fall into place. We live in a world that constantly measures success by visibility, more followers, more views, more likes, more recognition. Every platform tells us that being noticed is the goal. But here's the question very few people stop to ask: what happens after people notice you? If there is no value behind the attention disappears just as quickly as it arrived. Think about the people who have had the greatest impact on your life. Chances are they weren't trying to impress you. They weren't performing for your approval. They weren't constantly reminding you how talented they were. Instead, they made your life better. They taught you something. They challenged you. They believed in you before you believed in yourself. Their influence came from contribution, not competition. This is one of the most misunderstood principles of leadership. Leadership is not about attracting people. It's about serving people so well that they choose to stay. Anyone can capture attention for a moment. Very few people can earn trust for a lifetime, and trust is always built on value. Imagine walking into a room where everyone is trying to be heard. Everyone is speaking louder than the next person. Everyone wants to prove they're the smartest. What usually happens? Nobody truly listens. Now imagine one person quietly asking the right question. Instead of talking about themselves, they become curious about everyone else. They listen deeply. They solve problems. They create clarity where there was confusion. Suddenly, that person becomes the one everyone remembers. It wasn't because they demanded attention. It was because they created value. Human beings are naturally drawn toward people who make them feel stronger, safer, wiser, or more hopeful. We don't remember every conversation we've ever had, but we always remember how someone made us feel. That's because emotions create memories far more effectively than information ever could. If every interaction you have leaves people feeling encouraged instead of discouraged, understood instead of judged, inspired instead of intimidated, then you become impossible to ignore. Not because you're trying to stand out, but because you're improving the experience of everyone around you. The irony is that the harder we chase attention, the more insecure we become. Why? Because attention is temporary. It constantly needs to be replaced. Today's viral success becomes tomorrow's forgotten moment. If your confidence depends on people noticing you, then your confidence becomes dependent on something you cannot control. Value works differently. Value compounds. Every helpful conversation compounds. Every promise you keep compounds. Every problem you solve compounds. Every act of integrity compounds. These small moments rarely make headlines, but over time they build something incredibly difficult to replace: credibility. Credibility is earned in silence long before it's recognized in public. Most people only see the success. They don't see the years of consistency behind it. When we look at great leaders, entrepreneurs, teachers, coaches, or creators, we often assume they became influential because they were exceptionally gifted. But when you study their journeys, you discover something surprising. They spent years focusing on helping people before people started celebrating them. They answered questions no one else wanted to answer. They solved problems others ignored. They showed up when nobody was watching. They kept their word even when breaking it would have been easier. And little by little, their reputation became stronger than any marketing campaign could ever create. Because reputation is simply accumulated value. Think about your own relationships. Who do you call when you need advice? Who do you trust during difficult moments? It's probably not the loudest person you know. It's the person who has consistently proven that they care, the person whose actions align with their words, the person who makes your life better simply by being part of it. That's value. Now imagine applying this principle everywhere. At work, instead of asking, how can I get promoted? Ask, how can I become so valuable that promoting me becomes obvious? In business, instead of asking, how do I sell more? Ask, how do I solve a bigger problem? In leadership, instead of asking, how do I get people to follow me? Ask, how do I help people succeed? Notice how each question shifts the focus away from yourself, because purpose always begins with others. The remarkable thing about human behavior is that people can sense your intentions, even when you never speak them aloud. If your only goal is personal gain, people eventually feel it. But if your genuine goal is contribution, they feel that too. People don't buy into perfection. People buy into sincerity. That's why authenticity has become one of the rarest forms of value in today's world. We're surrounded by carefully edited images, polished presentations, and perfectly crafted personal brands. Yet despite all this connection through technology, people are desperately searching for someone who feels real, someone whose confidence doesn't come from pretending to know everything, someone who's willing to admit mistakes, someone who asks for feedback, someone who celebrates others without feeling threatened. Ironically, vulnerability often creates more trust than perfection ever could, because perfection creates distance. Authenticity creates connection, and connection creates influence. The goal is never to become the center of attention. The goal is to become the center of trust. When people know that you consistently bring solutions instead of excuses, encouragement instead of criticism, clarity instead of confusion, they begin seeking you out naturally. You no longer have to convince people you're valuable. Your actions speak before your words ever do. And that's the difference between attention and value. Attention asks, look at me. Value asks, how can I help you? One fades the moment people look away. The other grows stronger every time someone remembers how you changed their life, solved their problem, or inspired them to become a better version of themselves. Trust is one of those things that everyone wants, yet very few people intentionally build. We often assume trust is created through impressive words, outstanding talent, or remarkable achievements. But if you've ever worked with someone who was incredibly skilled but impossible to rely on, you already know the truth. Competence may earn someone's attention, but consistency earns their trust. The people who become impossible to ignore aren't necessarily the most charismatic, they are the most dependable. They become the people others turn to because they know what to expect. They know that when this person says they'll do something, it gets done. When they make a promise, they keep it. When things become difficult, they don't disappear. They stay. That kind of consistency creates something incredibly powerful. It creates psychological safety. Human beings are wired to seek safety before anything else. Long before we care about someone's intelligence, confidence, or experience, we ask ourselves a question we rarely say out loud. Can I trust this person? Our brains make this decision almost automatically. We watch how people behave under pressure. We notice whether their actions match their words. We pay attention to whether they treat everyone with the same level of respect or only those who can benefit them. Trust isn't built during your best moments. It's built during your hardest ones. Anyone can be kind when everything is going well. Anyone can appear confident when success comes easily. But pressure has a way of revealing character. Challenges don't create who we are. They expose who we've already become. Think about the leaders you've respected most in your life. Chances are they weren't perfect. They made mistakes. They had difficult conversations. Sometimes they failed. But what separated them from everyone else wasn't perfection. It was honesty. They admitted when they were wrong. They took responsibility instead of making excuses. They didn't hide behind their title or position. They showed up with integrity, especially when it was uncomfortable. Integrity isn't about doing the right thing when people are watching. It's about doing the right thing when nobody would ever know the difference. That's because trust grows quietly. It's built in the countless invisible moments that never appear on social media or in headlines. It's built when you arrive on time because you respect other people's time. It's built when you finish what you started. It's built when you give credit instead of taking it. It's built when you tell the truth even when a lie would be easier. It's built when your behavior stays consistent regardless of who is standing in front of you. These moments seem small on their own, but together, They create a reputation that becomes stronger than any advertisement you could ever create. Reputation is simply the memory people have of your consistency. Every interaction either strengthens that memory or weakens it. Every promise either adds another brick to the foundation or removes one. And here's the interesting part. Most people overestimate the importance of dramatic moments and underestimate the power of ordinary ones. They think trust is earned by making one heroic decision. In reality, it's earned by making hundreds of ordinary decisions correctly, choosing patience over frustration, choosing honesty over convenience, choosing responsibility over blame, choosing discipline over shortcuts. Again and again, over weeks, over years. That's how trust compounds. It's very similar to planting a tree. On the first day, nothing appears to happen. On the 100th day, it still doesn't seem impressive. But underground, something remarkable is taking place. The roots are growing deeper. They're becoming strong enough to support something much larger in the future. Trust works the same way. The strongest relationships often look effortless from the outside because nobody sees the years of consistent behavior that built them. This is why trust can take years to build and only seconds to destroy. Not because people are unforgiving, but because inconsistency creates uncertainty. The moment people begin questioning whether your words truly match your actions, doubt enters the relationship, and doubt spreads quickly. People don't expect perfection, they expect consistency. If you make a mistake, admit it. If you don't know the answer, say you don't know. If you fail, own the failure. Ironically, these moments often increase trust rather than decrease it. Why? Because honesty is predictable. Defensiveness is not. One of the greatest misconceptions about leadership is believing that confidence means never showing weakness. Real confidence looks very different. Real confidence says, I need help. Real confidence says, I was wrong. Real confidence says, let's solve this together. People trust leaders who are human because humanity creates connection. Perfection creates distance. Think about someone who constantly changes their values depending on the situation. One day they stand for something. The next day they abandon it because it's unpopular. Can you predict their behavior? Probably not. Now think about someone whose principles remain steady regardless of pressure. Even if you disagree with them, you know where they stand. Predictability creates trust, not because people agree with everything you do, but because they understand who you are. That's why your values matter more than your image. An image can be carefully managed. Values eventually reveal themselves. Sooner or later, every decision becomes evidence of what you truly believe. Your calendar reveals your priorities. Your habits reveal your discipline. Your reactions reveal your emotional maturity. Your treatment of others reveals your character. Words can introduce you. Actions define you. This becomes even more important in a world where people are overwhelmed with information. Every day we're exposed to thousands of messages telling us who to trust, what to buy, and what to believe. In that environment, consistency becomes a competitive advantage. People remember the person who remains reliable while everyone else keeps changing. They remember the colleague who always delivers. They remember the friend who always listens. They remember the leader who remains calm during uncertainty. Because consistency creates stability. And stability creates confidence. Eventually, something remarkable begins to happen. People stop questioning whether you'll follow through. They stop wondering whether your values are genuine. They stop looking for proof because your history has already become the proof. Your reputation begins speaking before you ever enter the room. Not because you demanded respect. Not because you convinced people with clever words, but because your actions quietly repeated the same message over and over again until people no longer had to guess who you were. That's what trust really is. It's the quiet confidence people feel when your behavior has become more believable than your promises, when your integrity becomes your identity, and when the consistency of your actions makes your presence impossible to ignore. There comes a moment in every person's life when they have to decide what matters more. Being accepted by everyone or being true to something that genuinely matters. It sounds like a simple choice, but it rarely feels simple, because as human beings, we are wired to seek belonging. We want to be liked. We want to fit in. We want to avoid rejection. And there is nothing wrong with that. The problem begins when our desire for approval becomes stronger than our commitment to purpose. The moment you start making decisions based on what everyone else will think, you slowly hand over control of your life to people who aren't responsible for your future. Approval is unpredictable. Purpose is steady. Approval changes with trends. Purpose survives them. Approval depends on opinions. Purpose depends on values. This is why so many talented people spend years feeling invisible. They aren't lacking ability. They're lacking direction. They're constantly adjusting themselves to match what they think others want. They become different versions of themselves depending on who's watching. And over time, they lose something incredibly valuable. They lose clarity. Without clarity, confidence becomes impossible. Because confidence isn't built by hearing people clap for you. It's built by knowing why you're doing what you're doing. Think about the leaders who have inspired millions of people throughout history. They were rarely loved by everyone. In fact, many of them faced criticism, rejection, and resistance long before they received recognition. If their mission had depended on universal approval, they would have quit before making any meaningful impact. What kept them moving wasn't praise, it was purpose. Purpose gives ordinary people extraordinary resilience. When you know why your work matters, obstacles stop feeling like signs to quit. They become part of the journey. When you know who you're serving, setbacks become temporary. When you know the impact you're trying to create, rejection becomes information instead of identity. This is one of the greatest shifts a person can make. Stop asking, do they like me? Start asking, am I creating value? Those are completely different questions. The first makes you dependent on other people's emotions. The second keeps you focused on your contribution. And contribution is something you can control. Approval is not. The interesting thing about purpose is that it changes the way you see failure. If your goal is simply to impress people, every mistake feels devastating because it threatens your image. But if your goal is to serve a purpose larger than yourself, mistakes become lessons. They become feedback. They become opportunities to improve your ability to make a difference. Purpose removes your ego from the center of the story. Instead of asking, how do I look? You begin asking, how can I help? That small shift changes everything, because people naturally trust those who care more about the mission than their own reputation. We've all experienced the difference. We've worked with people who only cared about getting credit, and we've worked with people who cared about getting results. The second group always leaves a stronger impression. Not because they're louder, but because they're focused on something bigger than themselves. Purpose creates consistency because values don't change every day. Opinions do, social media trends do, public expectations do, markets do. But principles remain steady, and people are drawn towards stability, especially in uncertain times. Imagine being a lighthouse during a storm. The lighthouse doesn't chase every ship. It doesn't move every time the wind changes direction. It simply stands where it was built to stand. Its purpose gives it stability, and that stability gives other people confidence. Leadership works the same way. People don't follow leaders because those leaders always have perfect answers. They follow leaders because they know what those leaders stand for. When values become clear, decisions become easier. You stop saying yes to everything. You stop trying to please everyone. You stop measuring your worth through applause. Instead, you begin filtering every opportunity through a simple question. Does this move me closer to the impact I want to create? If the answer is no, you have permission to walk away. That's one of the greatest forms of confidence. Not adding more to your life, protecting what already matters. Many people confuse business with purpose. They're constantly occupied, always responding, always reacting, always chasing the next opportunity. But movement isn't the same as progress. You can spend years climbing the ladder only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. Purpose forces you to ask a harder question before you begin climbing. Why am I climbing in the first place? The answer to that question determines everything else. Your habits, your relationships, your priorities, your career, your legacy. Purpose becomes the filter through which every important decision is made. Without it, distractions multiply. With it, distractions lose their power. This is also why comparison becomes less dangerous. When you don't know your purpose, it's easy to envy someone else's success. You start comparing your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter 20. You begin chasing goals that were never yours to begin with. But when you're deeply connected to your purpose, someone else's journey stops feeling like competition. It becomes inspiration. Because you're no longer trying to become them. You're becoming more fully yourself. That's incredibly freeing. The world doesn't need another copy of someone who's already successful. It needs people who understand the unique contribution only they can make. Purpose isn't about being the best in the world. It's about being the best for the world in the way only you can. And here's the beautiful part. People are remarkably good at recognizing genuine conviction. You can't fake it for long. You can imitate someone's words. You can copy their style. You can borrow their strategies. But purpose creates an energy that cannot be manufactured. It shows up in how you speak, how you listen, how you make decisions, how you respond under pressure. People may not always remember everything you said, but they'll remember that you believed in something, that your actions reflected your values, that your commitment remained steady even when recognition was nowhere to be found. Because purpose has never been about standing in the spotlight. It's about carrying a light that helps others find their way, even when nobody is watching you, even when applause is absent, and even when the only thing pushing you forward is the quiet certainty that what you're building matters far more than being approved by people who were never meant to define your worth. Most people believe that becoming irreplaceable starts with learning more skills, earning more qualifications, or working longer hours. While those things can certainly help, they are not what truly separates people who leave a lasting impact from those who are quickly forgotten. The real difference begins much deeper. It begins with the mindset you bring to every challenge, every relationship, and every opportunity. Skills can be taught, knowledge can be acquired, experience can be gained. But mindset determines whether any of those things will ever reach their full potential. Two people can stand in the exact same situation, face the exact same obstacle, and walk away with completely different futures. One sees a problem and immediately begins searching for someone to blame. The other sees the same problem and starts asking, "What can I learn from this?" The circumstances are identical. The outcome is completely different. The difference isn't talent, it's perspective. Your mindset shapes the questions you ask yourself every day. And the quality of your questions determines the quality of your decisions. If every setback makes you ask, "Why does this always happen to me?" your brain starts collecting evidence that you're a victim of circumstance. But if every setback makes you ask, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" your brain begins searching for growth instead of excuses. The event hasn't changed, only your interpretation has. And interpretation is one of the greatest powers every human being possesses. Life doesn't always give us control over what happens. It almost always gives us control over how we respond. That response becomes our identity over time. Think about the people you've admired most. They probably experienced disappointment. They faced rejection, they failed, they doubted themselves. They encountered moments when quitting would have been completely understandable. Yet something inside them refused to let temporary circumstances define permanent identity. They didn't say, "I failed, therefore I am a failure." They said, "I failed, therefore I learned." That single shift changes everything, because when your identity becomes tied to learning instead of proving yourself, failure loses its ability to control you. You stop protecting your ego. You start expanding your potential. One of the most dangerous mindsets in today's world is believing that your value comes from always appearing capable. People spend enormous amounts of energy trying to look successful. They avoid difficult conversations because they fear looking weak. They avoid asking questions because they fear looking inexperienced. They avoid taking risks because they fear making mistakes. Ironically, these behaviors prevent the very growth they're hoping to achieve. Growth requires discomfort, learning requires humility, leadership requires courage. None of those things happen inside your comfort zone. Imagine a person who enters every meeting believing they already know everything worth knowing. How much can they learn? Very little. Now imagine someone entering the same room with genuine curiosity. They ask thoughtful questions. They listen carefully. They welcome different perspectives. Who will grow faster? The answer is obvious. Curiosity is one of the strongest indicators of long-term success because it keeps your mind open long after others stop learning. The moment you believe you've arrived is the moment you stop improving. That's why the strongest leaders often spend more time asking questions than giving answers. They understand something most people overlook. Knowledge creates confidence. Curiosity creates wisdom. And wisdom is far more difficult to replace. Another characteristic of an irreplaceable mindset is ownership. Average people often focus on what isn't their responsibility. Exceptional people ask what is. Ownership means refusing to wait for perfect conditions. It means taking initiative before someone asks. It means solving problems instead of simply identifying them. It's easy to point out what's broken. It's much harder to become someone who helps fix it. Organizations notice people who solve problems. Communities remember people who create solutions. Families depend on people who take responsibility. Ownership turns ordinary individuals into trusted leaders, not because they have all the answers, because people know they'll step forward when challenges appear instead of stepping back. An irreplaceable mindset also understands the importance of adaptability. The world changes faster than ever before. Technology evolves. Industries transform. Markets shift. New opportunities emerge while old ones disappear. People who cling to yesterday's methods eventually become trapped by yesterday's thinking. The people who remain valuable are those who continue evolving. Adaptability doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means changing your methods while remaining loyal to your mission. Your purpose stays constant. Your approach improves. That's how lasting relevance is created. Many people resist change because they interpret change as loss. But growth often requires letting go of the version of yourself that no longer serves your future. You cannot become who you're capable of becoming while insisting on remaining exactly who you've always been. Transformation always asks for courage before it offers rewards. And courage begins in the mind long before it appears in action. There is another quality that separates irreplaceable people from everyone else. They think long-term. In a culture obsessed with instant results, they understand that meaningful success is rarely immediate. They don't become discouraged because progress is slow. They understand that slow progress is still progress. A tree doesn't grow overnight. Trust isn't built overnight. Mastery isn't achieved overnight. Neither is influence. The strongest foundations are almost always invisible in the beginning. This mindset creates patience, not passive waiting. Purposeful persistence. Every small improvement matters. Every disciplined habit matters. Every conversation matters. Every lesson matters. Because they understand that greatness is rarely the result of one extraordinary decision. It's usually the accumulation of thousands of ordinary decisions made consistently over time. This way of thinking also changes how you view competition. Instead of trying to outperform everyone around you, you begin competing with the person you were yesterday. Comparison becomes less important. Improvement becomes everything. You stop measuring success by external validation. You start measuring it by internal progress. Did I learn today? Did I contribute today? Did I become more capable today? Those questions create a healthier definition of success, one that nobody can take away from you. An irreplaceable mindset also recognizes that relationships are not interruptions to success. They are success. The strongest opportunities rarely come through perfect resumes. They come through trust, through generosity, through people who remember how you treated them when there was nothing to gain. Every interaction becomes an investment. Every act of kindness becomes part of your reputation. Every moment of integrity strengthens your influence, because people don't just remember what you accomplished. They remember who you became while accomplishing it. And in the end, that's what truly makes someone impossible to replace. Not their title, not their salary, not the number of achievements listed beside their name, but the way they think when no one is watching. The way they respond when life becomes uncertain, the way they choose growth over comfort, responsibility over excuses, curiosity over arrogance, service over status, and purpose over convenience, until their mindset becomes so deeply rooted in who they are that replacing what they do becomes possible. But replacing who they are becomes almost impossible. If you want to become impossible to ignore, stop asking how to make people remember your name and start asking how to make people remember how they felt after they met you. That question changes everything, because influence is never measured by the amount of attention you receive. It's measured by the amount of positive impact you leave behind. The world has convinced us that success is about accumulation, more money, more recognition, more achievements, more influence. But when you study the people whose legacy continues long after they've left the room, you discover a different pattern. They didn't spend their lives asking, "What can I get?" They spent their lives asking, "What can I give?" That is where lasting impact begins. Service is often misunderstood because people mistake it for weakness. They assume that serving others means putting yourself last or sacrificing your own ambitions. But true service has nothing to do with making yourself smaller. It has everything to do with making your purpose bigger than yourself. The strongest leaders don't build followers, they build leaders. The best teachers don't create students who depend on them. They create students who eventually surpass them. The greatest coaches don't seek applause for themselves. They celebrate the victories of the people they've helped. That is the difference between temporary success and lasting significance. Temporary success asks, "How far can I go?" Lasting significance asks, "How many people can I help go farther?" Human beings have always been drawn to people who genuinely care about their growth. We naturally trust those who invest in us without immediately expecting something in return. That's because generosity creates emotional connection, and connection is where influence lies. Think about someone who changed your life. Perhaps they encouraged you during a difficult season. Perhaps they believed in your potential before you recognized it yourself. Perhaps they offered guidance that completely changed your direction. Years later, you may not remember every word they spoke, but you'll never forget how they made you believe in yourself. That's impact. Notice something important. It didn't require extraordinary talent. It required intentional presence. Some of the greatest opportunities to influence others happen in moments that seem completely ordinary. Listening without checking your phone, remembering someone's name, keeping your promise, giving honest encouragement, sharing knowledge freely, helping someone solve a problem without expecting recognition. These actions appear small, yet they often become unforgettable because they meet one of humanity's deepest needs, the need to matter. Every person you meet is carrying invisible challenges. Some are fighting fear. Some are carrying disappointment. Some are questioning whether they're good enough. Some are simply hoping that someone notices them. You may never know their story, but your response can still become part of it. That's why kindness should never be underestimated. Kindness is not softness. Kindness is strength under control. It requires patience when frustration would be easier. It requires empathy when judgment would be faster. It requires humility when pride would feel more comfortable. The remarkable thing is that people rarely forget those moments. Not because they were dramatic, because they were meaningful. Meaning creates memory. This is why purpose-driven people focus less on transactions and more on transformations. A transaction ends once something is exchanged. A transformation continues long after the interaction is over. Imagine two business owners. One focuses only on closing sales. The other focuses on improving people's lives. Which one earns loyal customers? Which one receives recommendations? Which one builds relationships that last for years? The answer has very little to do with pricing. It has everything to do with trust and impact. The same principle applies to leadership. People don't remain loyal because someone has authority. They remain loyal because someone made them better. The best leaders ask questions that help others discover answers. They create environments where people feel safe enough to contribute. They celebrate progress instead of demanding perfection. They understand that every person's success strengthens the entire team. That mindset creates cultures people don't want to leave. And cultures always outlast individuals. One of the greatest misconceptions about impact is believing that you need a massive platform before you can make a difference. You don't. Impact has never depended on audience size. It depends on intentionality. A conversation can change a life. A single opportunity can redirect someone's future. One moment of encouragement can become the reason another person refuses to quit. History is filled with examples of lives changed because one individual chose to care, not because they had millions of followers. Because they were fully present with the one person standing in front of them. We often underestimate the ripple effect of our actions because we rarely see where those ripples end. The advice you give today may shape a decision made years from now. The confidence you help build in someone today may inspire them to help hundreds of others tomorrow. The kindness you extend today may become the example they carry into every future relationship. Impact multiplies. That's why service is never small. Its results often extend far beyond what we can measure. Another beautiful truth about serving others is that it transforms us at the same time. When your attention shifts away from protecting your image, you become more resilient. Criticism loses some of its power because your mission matters more than your ego. Comparison loses its grip because you're focused on contribution instead of competition. Fear begins to shrink because your purpose becomes greater than your comfort. You stop asking whether you're impressive enough. You start asking whether you're useful enough. That is an entirely different way to live. It's also a far more fulfilling one. People spend years chasing happiness through personal achievement, only to discover that fulfillment usually arrives through meaningful contribution. There is deep satisfaction in knowing someone stands taller because you encouraged them. Someone believed again because you listened. Someone found courage because you shared yours. Someone reached their potential because you chose to invest in theirs. Those victories don't always appear on resumes. They don't always receive awards, but they become part of your legacy. Legacy isn't created by the number of people who know your name. It's created by the number of lives that became better because you lived. Years from now, very few people will remember how many promotions you earned. Very few will remember how many awards decorated your office. Very few will remember how many followers you accumulated. But people will remember whether they felt respected in your presence. They'll remember whether you kept your word. They'll remember whether you inspired confidence instead of fear. They'll remember whether your success made room for someone else's success. Because in the end, the people who become impossible to ignore are rarely those who spend their lives trying to become unforgettable. They are the ones who quietly choose day after day to leave every person, every team, every conversation, and every opportunity a little better than they found it, understanding that real influence is not measured by the spotlight you stand in, but by the light you leave in others long after you've walked away.